Around 90% of the second class men did not survive, and only two couples actually survived, where both the husband and wife survived in second class. So this is despite the fact they had direct access to 8 lifeboats. Third class didn't even have direct access, but also in third class's perspective, a lot of the men were in the bow of the ship when she struck the iceberg, and a lot of them were down below where the water was coming in, and the immediate need of evacuation was much more apparent than if you were second class. A lot of the second class men sort of waited to be told what to do. They knew the rule was women and children first, and they just waited to be told what to do.
Titanic Talk with Nelson Aspen and Alexandra Boyd. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, and everything else to do with the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Join us and our special guests as we continue the 25th anniversary celebrations of Titanic. This is your first class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams.
I'm Nelson Aspen, and welcome to another episode of Season 2 Titanic Talk with my charming and lovely co-host Alexandra Boyd, the filmmaker behind Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries. And when Alexandra and I wrapped up season 1, we were saying, let's put the word out to the people that are tuning into our podcasts and find ways to expand our Titanic family. Everywhere we go, we seem to increase our family size in all the most wonderful ways. If only we could choose our blood relatives the way we are choosing our Titanic relatives, wouldn't it be a perfect world?
My gosh, don't get me started, Nelson.
No, let's not talk about blood relatives.
Come back to Titanic, come back.
Lo and behold, someone responded to the call, and what a call it was. Alexander, please do the honors.
Yes, Joshua Noble is a self-confessed Titaniac, which is the best kind, of course. You don't want to be outed by anybody, not in this day and age. And certainly we didn't do it in our documentary, Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries. But Joshua, he goes by Josh, I believe. He just wrote to us and said, I have been a fan or completely obsessed with Titanic since a very young age, which is a very familiar story to us now. And we had to have him on. Josh, welcome to Titanic Talk.
Well, thank you for having me on.
I think in your letter you said you were 6. Tell us what attracted a 6-year-old to the story of Titanic.
Well, it was Easter Sunday, and we were driving home from church, and of course, growing up in the Bible Belt, everyone floods the churches. So there were so many people at this one we were attending. My mother made mention, some reference to Titanic with the number of people that were there. And I said, "What's Titanic?" And she gave me a small story, and it fascinated me. And so I was also homeschooled. And so next time we were at a library to get stuff for school, I decided, let me check out this Titanic story no more. And that turned into me checking out all the VHS tapes, all the books about Titanic, and then it turned into the rest of the libraries in the area, and then finally started accumulating and buying Titanic books. And it's just been an insatiable thirst for knowledge ever since.
So it was more the history that started. I'm assuming that at some point you were old enough to be allowed to watch the film as well.
Yes, I was born in 93, so I was quite young when the film came out. And first time watching it was my parents basically rented the VHS tape from Blockbuster. And
I know somebody who will want that tape.
JD's watching.
I believe I actually met them at Titanicon earlier.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
talking about.
You have to tell me a bit about that, because I'm so sorry I missed it. Okay, so you watched on VHS.
Yes, and they fast forwarded through the parts that were not suitable for children. But really, that just increased my thirst for knowledge for the ship and just wanting to know more. And absolutely loved the movie, and I always have. And it's been a big part of my life as well.
You've become such an important figure in the social media world. I'm not on Facebook, but I do follow your Instagram page, Titanic Legacy. It's very impressive. You've traveled the world in your passion for all things Titanic. What does your family think of this now? Is your mom still around? Is she still aware of your Titanic passion that was inflamed that morning in church?
Oh yes, she watched me as I just started going, and she's helped support and encourage. There was a point when she was like, might want to step back and look at other things, but you know, after a while, she's come to know and respect it. That it's not going away, because there's so many fascinating stories and aspects of the ship that.
I know you've been to Southampton and Cove and Belfast.
Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit about those trips and how they affected you to actually sort of be standing in the places where Titanic had been, however many years prior to when you were there. But what other ways does your passion for Titanic manifest itself? Do you collect things? I'm sure you have a library of books like Nelson does. What's your favorite thing to do, or favorite new thing to find about Titanic?
I love everything about it. And with the trip, one of my best friends, Hunter Landau, and myself decided to take a trip to the spots where Titanic was for the 105th anniversary. And so we were there in Southampton on April 10th, and we were in Cove on April 11th. We didn't get to Cherbourg, unfortunately. And then we made it to Belfast by the time of the anniversary, and we were there for the gathering with Simon Medhurst and a number of other lovely Titanic descendants, historians, and super fans. And it was an absolutely wonderful time to stand there, to be in the Thompson dry dock and look up and know that, there was a building there that was the height that Titanic was when it was there. And to look up, and it really gave a sense of the scale and the size of the Titanic and Olympic and Britannic that were also there. To be there in Southampton and be at Grapes Pub, where some of the crew were having their final drinks before sailing on Titanic. And it was just a wonderful experience. Cove as well.
Beautiful, right?
Yeah, it hasn't changed a whole lot since Titanic. You can easily imagine, the Titanic passengers being on board, being there right before sailing and looking out over the harbor to see the ship off in the distance.
Michael Martin, who does the Titanic Trail tours, was one of the things that always struck me was he talks about the handrail, and it's the same handrail that Titanic passengers would have held onto. So those I don't know, sliding door moments are really special.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go to Cherbourg, and also I think there a lot of people want to go to Arctic, where there's a hotel there that bought the interior of some of the Olympic and have recreated it for their tea room or their dining room. Have you been there?
I have not. That's on my bucket list, though, to go. They have some of the balustrades and railings from the grand staircase of the Olympic, and a number of panels from the lounge and fittings and things like that. And so that is on the bucket list, to go and stand there in what used to be the lounge. That's about as close as you can get to being on Olympic class liner, aside from diving to Titanic herself.
Or
and then you've got to get to New York.
Cameron set, I would just like to say.
Yes.
Well,
and if the Titanic didn't make it to New York, but you've got to make it to New York, so are you as interested in the Carpathia? I've become increasingly, since Titanic Talk, I would say, I knew of Carpathia's place in Titanic history, but now that I've met so many enthusiasts like yourself, I'm much more interested in Carpathia than I ever was, and her time in New York City as well.
Yes, the Carpathia is a fascinating story, and really outside of Titanic, being a troop ship during World War I, carrying the troops over. And one of the last surviving World War I veterans, I believe his name was Frank Buckles. He was actually on the Carpathia. That's what brought him over to England. And so just different. She had a fascinating story as well.
I think it's interesting too, and what we've learned, certainly the stuff I've picked up, talking to Simon Medhurst, talking about his great grandfather, Quartermaster Hitchens, as an example, is that we think of everybody's lives ending when Titanic sank, and those mariners, those sailors, they had to earn a living. They kept earning a living. They kept sailing. They kept going around the world on these ocean liners. And actually, their lives after the disaster can sometimes be as interesting and as tragic as being involved. You know, whether there was sort of post-traumatic syndrome or survivor guilt, or being vilified by the press and by their communities because they survived and they may have taken the place of somebody else. It's really fascinating to see that ripple effect and how it's literally come down the generations, and how we can now recognize that a lot more than, say, people did 111 years ago.
Absolutely. And there were plenty of stories where that happened. Like there was one survivor, I think it was Little John, and he was a steward, and there's two pictures side by side that I've seen, and they were taken about 6 months apart, before Titanic and after Titanic, and his hair just went completely white. He aged dramatically after Titanic. And you have other stories. Annie Robinson, for some reason, either jumped or fell off a ship not too long after Titanic, and she was the stewardess that Thomas Andrews told to put a life jacket on during the sinking, that makes a cameo in the movie. And so just different ways that it manifested itself. It's all very different too, with the different survivors.
You talk about how you really enjoy the, for lack of a better adjective, minor characters in the Titanic story, the lesser known individuals. I certainly have my own, as you saw in Alexandra's documentary, my own connection with Milton Long. So, you know, who is an obscure figure in Titanic history, pretty much. So I'm curious to know, in addition to whatever anecdotes you want to share about some of these lesser known individuals, if you have a favorite. It's very easy for Titanic fans to say, oh my gosh, it's got to be Molly Brown, or it's got to be Thomas Andrews. Gareth Russell is a great example. He's such a tremendous Thomas Andrews fan that his marvelous book, Ship of Dreams, features Thomas Andrews so lovingly. I mean, you learn so much about the man that he was. Less, I mean, not the character of the man. So what about for you?
There are a few survivors that have really stood out to me, and passengers and crew, but one of my favorites has to be Major Archibald Butt, and he's one of the more commonly known passengers. But as a fellow Georgian, he definitely strikes a chord with me. Grew up in the post-Civil War, and he really loved the military, and he served in the Spanish-American War, the American-Filipino War, and he was a military aide to Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, and he and Taft were very tight. They were very close friends. And he wrote a letter almost every day to his sister-in-law, and these letters and his scrapbooks are in the Georgia archives. And just to sit there and go through his letters and go through his scrapbooks and his photographs, and to read about him and learn about him, is absolutely fascinating, because there's so much information, and being connected to a popular figure of the time means that we have a lot more research and accounts of him.
I know there's a memorial to him on the grounds of the White House, to him and his companion on the Titanic. Is there any such memorialization of his life in Georgia?
There is. There is a bridge called the Butt Memorial Bridge, and then there's also there's several connections in Augusta, but another interesting one is the Morris Art Museum in Augusta has a painting by Francis Millet of Archie Butt, and that's a fascinating thing to see, with two Titanic connections. But yeah, it's just, and then he has a memorial in Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., and it's not far, I believe, from Robert Todd Lincoln's grave.
Who else do you know And,
Well,
and how does it manifest to you? So, do you collect anything? Do you write about them? Do you dream about them? I mean, who are the main characters in your Titanic story? Archibald Butt's a great one, especially with the Georgian connection.
Yes. Well, there's also Alfred Rush, and he's an interesting one. He was a third-class passenger. He was traveling with the Goldsmith family, and when I was about 11 or 12, I read his story in one of the children's books. And he was 15, he turned 16 on April 14th, the day of the sinking. And for his birthday, he was given trousers because at that time it was seen as a rite of passage, or becoming a man, to get trousers. And so during the sinking, he was offered a chance to go up to the boat deck with Frank Goldsmith and his mother. And he stood back and said, "No, I'm staying with the men." And he unfortunately died that night. And
that's in the Barbara Stanwyck, Clifton Webb version of Titanic. That whole scenario of the kid getting his long pants, and he dies with his father. Spoiler alert: the kid dies, but he dies with long pants.
Right. And that story is, when I was reading that about 11 or 12 years old, that was the first time like that really made me place myself in their shoes, like right there. And his stories always struck a chord with me. As a kid, I was like, would I do that? Would I have the courage to do that? And I can't say for sure because I've never been there in that situation, but it definitely has stuck with me.
We've talked before, haven't we, Nelson, about the age of chivalry that has passed now, that we don't understand. And I think maybe depending on his parents or just the society that he was growing up in, it felt more of a natural thing, even though choosing to stay and not get on a lifeboat doesn't feel natural in any way at all. But I think there's a certain time that has passed where people behaved differently. They just
what it would have done to their reputation if John Jacob Astor had gotten into a lifeboat and made it home. He would have been perceived as a villain, just for surviving. You talk about
Ismay didn't really surviving, did he?
That's right.
He was he snuck himself onto a boat. But there was also that thing of we've talked about, which is actually first class, second class, and many third class. Many more third class people died. But your money can't save you now, said Mr. Murdoch to Cal Hockley. That was a overriding metaphor for what was going on, that it was every man for himself, and the men, many of them chose to stay, which must have just been horrendous.
I had an interesting conversation with Stephen Schwenkert, the one of the filmmakers of The Six, and he was saying that there was a disproportionate amount of men from second class who perished, because the first class men, more of them survived, and more of the third class because they swam for it. There was actually they didn't get to have a pleasant disembarkation, but the second class gentlemen were really affected, which I found interesting.
Around 90% of the second class men did not survive, and only two couples actually survived, where both the husband and wife survived. And so in second class, so it's and this is despite the fact they had direct access to 8 lifeboats. Third class didn't even have direct access. But also in third class's perspective, a lot of the men were in the bow of the ship when she struck the iceberg, and a lot of them were down below where the water was coming in, and where the immediate need of evacuation was much more apparent than if you were second class, as well as a lot of the second class men sort of waited to be told what to do. They knew the rule was women and children first, and they just waited to be told what to do. And unfortunately,
well, you trust that that the officers would know what they're doing, and you talk about how you've traveled to these places in Titanic lore that are a part of Titanic history, but you also mentioned that you've gone to Titanic Con in Las Vegas. You're meeting other members of our extended community of Titanic enthusiasts. Where are some of your, in your opinion, in your very expert opinion, the places that one must go to, aside from Belfast and Cove, which we all agree are on the must see list? What have been some of your most positive Titanic experiences?
Well, I would say anywhere in, to be honest, New York City. I've not been in New York City just yet. I do want to go. But that is full.
I'll be waiting for you. I'll meet you at the Strauss Memorial.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I believe Dave Gardner does a tour of the connections and things like that, but that's full of connections. I have been to Philadelphia. That has wonderful connections. And as a matter of fact, Linwood Hall, which belonged to George Widener, it's recently been they've recently started the restoration work. It's a gorgeous mansion. And so Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. has a number of Titanic places. As far as museums go, Pigeon Forge is, in my opinion, the best one. Full of artifacts, and these are artifacts that have not been brought up from the ocean floor. These are artifacts from the people from that got off in the lifeboats, that items that came off the Titanic before she sailed, and items that were found floating in the water afterwards when they were recovering the bodies. And so there's so many things in there from quality collections. These are independent collections, private collections, where the collectors have said, we want these items to be on display for the public to see.
We filmed at Pigeon Forge. We literally did a night at the museum, and after they closed the doors to the public at 11 p.m., we went around and we filmed, B-roll for the documentary. So we got to see it sort of in the dark on our own with a film crew, and then at 6 a.m. they kicked us out so they could get ready to open the doors again. So I know exactly what you're talking about there. They're very and a very to me, quite obscure and interesting place to have a Titanic museum. But once you're inside, you definitely feel the Edwardian era come upon you. They've done it very well.
What was TitanicCon like in Vegas? Because Titanic isn't the first thing you think of with Vegas. But then again, with all the themes that go on in the world of Vegas, it's in a strange way almost perfect.
Yeah, it kind of works. The museum is fantastic. As far as artifacts museums go, it's one of the best, especially with the big piece, largest piece of the wreck raised from the ship. And so they have wonderful artifacts. And then on top of that, the community that was there. Frank Goldsmith Jr., he comes to the Titanic cons every year. Julie Williams, who is a niece of Albert Caldwell, who was one of the 2 second-class couples that survived. And there were other descendants and other people that were all involved in the recovery of the big piece since it's the 25th anniversary. There were also people from the movie. Louis Abernathy kind of stole the show, who played Mr. Bodine in the movie, and then Fanny Brett, who played Madame Obar. She was fantastic. And
we can say the reason I wasn't there because it was tragic for me because I was all set. I had my headshots, all my 8x10s, glossies, all printed up, and a whole bunch of us were ready to come, but we are Screen Actors Guild members, and we were told very succinctly we could have signed headshots of ourselves, but not photographs of us from the film, because it would have been promoting a studio film, and of course we would have been promoting the biggest studio film of all time.
Right.
And I decided that nobody really wants a headshot of me. They want a headshot of me standing in the first class dining room with everything behind me. So I'm going to wait till next year, because next year, God willing, it will all be done and dusted and over. And so I will definitely, and all of us, we will all come, because I know just the handful of Titanic fans that I've met in the process of doing my film, because I'll be honest, not really up until now have I come up close and personal to people other than through Instagram, but to actually sit here just like we are now, just talking about the ship, just talking about the story and the stories that just go on and on and on, quite in such a fascinating way, through whether it's through the prism of James Cameron's Titanic, or whether it's whether it's because of the history or the museum, where, you know, I'm dying to go to the Luxor and see the Titanic Museum. I don't think it's going to be in Las Vegas next year, but Titanic Con is definitely on my bucket list as part of what we're doing here for Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries.
Josh, I want to ask you, I mean, what a thrill to see, you know, the big piece. However, what are your thoughts about excavation? Is it, I mean, it's a yin yang kind of thing. What are your thoughts on it?
As long as it's done respectfully and it's done well, then I fully support it. To be honest, if these artifacts are not recovered, then they will forever be lost. And there's a lot that we can learn from Titanic. And I believe they brought up several suitcases from some of the passengers and some of the crew that did teach us things about their lives and who they were. And so you know, and of course there are some artifacts that told us a lot of things technically about the Titanic, from the size of one of the toilets to the types of tiles that were used and other things that really helped us to understand what the Titanic looked like historically. And so I fully support salvage. Plus, RMS Titanic Inc. has the only rights to salvage the ship, and they are overseen by a court in Norfolk, Virginia, and they have better protections for their artifacts and better treatment for their artifacts than you get from the Lusitania, from the Empress of Ireland, from Andrea Doria, and other shipwrecks.
You're so proficient at your curation of Titanic history with your Facebook page and and all your social media. How do you impart this information behind the scenes? Do your have children? Do you have children? I think you have a child. Yes.
Yes, I have a daughter.
Does she know about the Titanic yet? I mean, how do you spread the word?
She's 6.5 months old, so I can't say that.
A little time to wait.
You could have a little mobile over her crib with an iceberg and a ship and a life jacket.
One of our friends had already sent us a Titanic onesie.
Sweet. Well, she'll be indoctrinated before long.
Oh, absolutely. It's her choice on whether or not she pursues any of that information, but it's there.
What about your partner? Is she fully on board?
Yes, my wife. Well, my wife is not as enthused about Titanic as I am, but she, over time, has become more interested in the artifacts and in the stories. And so I did wait on telling her about Titanic when we first met, because I was like, this is, you know, something you got to ease into. But you know,
I think you're not alone in that. We've picked up on that with a few people, haven't we? Unless people are like, you know, Dale or Zach, who are out and proud, you know, with every essence of their being is somewhat Titanic-esque. I think it's probably wise just to sort of, everyone has their passions. Everyone has something they're crazy about. I don't know if it's football or golf or.
Well, that's a good question then, Josh. What else lights your fire besides Titanic?
History in general. I love different subjects of history, the Civil War. When I was 17, I wrote to numerous survivors of the USS Indianapolis, and I have letters from them. There's only one left, unfortunately, still with us. But I have letters from them recounting the shark attacks and the shipwreck and what all they went through.
Are you a Jaws fan as well, then? You must love that monologue.
I'm not a huge Jaws fan, but I appreciated the mention because it really helped with getting the story out there. And, you know, I'm pretty sure it helped their cause when they were trying to exonerate the captain because he was court-martialed for the sinking.
Have you been to Pearl Harbor? Because that is, I mean, anybody who's interested in maritime history, as we are, I mean, have you been? Because it's amazing.
I have not. I'd love to go. I'd love to go to Pearl Harbor, and there's actually a survivor buried in Honolulu, Lutie Davis, who I think was mentioned earlier. She had an interesting story in second class, basically complaining about everything. But
Gareth Russell had a story about her. There were sisters or two ladies traveling together, and they were their radiators were too hot, and they were asked to move rooms, and
the original Karen.
Yes,
it was a mother and daughter. It was a mother and daughter,
goodness.
and they complained about everything. They had their deposition to talk about the sinking and what they experienced, and they spent the whole time complaining about the heating and the fact their room was too small and things like that.
There's one on every ship or plane or apartment building. There's always one. Before we wrap things up, just tell us where our listeners can find all of your wonderfulness.
Well, the Instagram page, Titanic Legacy Museumgram. I post almost daily different pictures, different information. And then Titanic Enthusiasts is a wonderful Facebook group where we love to talk all things Titanic, and get a lot of people sharing their passions, their models, their artwork, and everything else on that. And so both of those pages are really where I spend my most time for Titanic when I'm not, buried in some archives of research.
We're so grateful that you reached out to us. We're excited to meet you in person at one of these future events. And in the meantime, we're so honored that you're part of our Titanic Talk experience, and hopefully part of your Titanic Legacy Museumgram experience.
Thank you
so much, Josh. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited. To celebrate Season 2 of Titanic Talk, we've launched a line of Titanic Talk merch. A cap, a mug, a tote, a t-shirt or a hoodie. You'll be sure to find a unique gift for the Titaniac in your life. Look for the link in the notes and on Instagram, or go to bit.ly/Titanic Talk Shop.